She thought money gave her the right to do anything. The tourist crossed the forbidden line, mocking the motionless guardsman, and her hand was already reaching for his hat. "Entertain us!" she shouted, confident in her impunity. But what happened next made everyone freeze. The guardsman took a step forward and broke tradition, his words shocking not only her, but the entire crowd. How did this bold provocation end? Let's start from the beginning. Life on Whitehall was moving along as usual. The day began with London's familiar rhythm. Crowds of tourists with cameras, smartphones, and maps in hand filled the square in front of the royal stables. Amid the colorful clothing and constant noise, one figure stood out, motionless, like a monument. This was Sergeant Richard Grey, a man in his mid-30s with bronze skin, neatly cropped hair, and a powerful build. His bearskin hat towered above the crowd, and his perfectly tailored red uniform radiated authority and pride. As expected of a guardsman, Grey stood upright, ignoring the chaos around him. His gaze was fixed somewhere in the distance, as if he didn't notice the crowd at all. Yet even in his stillness, he commanded respect with his poise and dignity, embodying the traditions of the British monarchy. The crowd's restlessness. Among the sea of tourists, one figure stood out, a middle-aged woman. Karen, a larger woman dressed in a bright pink t-shirt, emblazoned with the loud slogan, "I'm in charge here," and denim shorts, epitomized the stereotypical tourist. Her phone, already recording, revealed her intentions. She was looking for entertainment. Karen pushed her way to the front row, elbowing less assertive onlookers aside. Her piercing voice easily cut through the chatter of the crowd. "Hey, wooden face!" she shouted, pointing at Grey. "Smile! It's for TikTok!" A few tourists chuckled. A woman nearby leaned toward her husband and whispered, "Such awful behavior. Can you even talk to a guardsman like that?" But Karen wasn't listening. She continued her spectacle. "Come on, show some emotion, guy. Or are you battery-operated?" she sneered, stepping closer. The first steps toward conflict. Karen crossed the white line, a silent boundary no one was allowed to breach. The crowd gasped, and several people raised their phones to capture the moment. Grey remained motionless, but his clenched jaw betrayed an internal struggle. "There we go," Karen said smugly, reaching for his hat. "I'll take this thing off for a picture." She laughed, clearly pleased with herself. Among the crowd, voices began to rise. "Hey, you're not allowed to do that. Is someone going to stop her?" But no one intervened. Everyone held their breath, watching Grey. His eyes, cold and focused, stared straight ahead as if he didn't notice the commotion. But his fingers twitched slightly, betraying the barely restrained tension within. The crowd's reaction. "This is outrageous," an elderly woman exclaimed. "These guards protect our culture, and she's treating him like a clown." Others, however, found Karen's antics amusing. "Oh, come on, it's funny," said a young man in a baseball cap. "He's just an actor." But many sided with Grey. "Guardsmen aren't clowns," an older gentleman nearby said. "They're a symbol of Britain." Meanwhile, Karen decided her provocations weren't dramatic enough. She stepped even closer, attempting to take a selfie right next to Grey while grabbing onto the strap of his weapon. The crowd froze. Rising tension. Karen was oblivious to the disapproving looks, laughing at her own behavior. "I'm a tourist," she declared to the crowd, "and you're all here for us, so relax." But Richard Grey remained unmoved, unshakable, like granite. His posture conveyed a clear message. Tradition comes first. The crowd seemed poised to either applaud his resilience or explode in outrage at Karen's audacity. The scene hung in a tense stillness, leaving space for the conflict to escalate beyond the ordinary duties of the day. The crowd in front of the royal stables grew thicker. The noise of voices and the flashing of cameras melded into chaos. Yet Sergeant Richard Grey stood like a bronze statue, fully focused on his duty. His gaze remained fixed on a single point, as if he were oblivious to the events unfolding around him. However, the next twist in the conflict was already on the horizon. the coin and the humiliation. Karen, still flaunting her bright pink t-shirt, moved closer to the guardsman. Coins jingled in her hand as she smirked and tossed one at his feet. "Well, there you go. Some tea money. Or are you too proud to pick it up?" she declared loudly, turning to the crowd for approval. Some people laughed, but most looked uncomfortable. "That's going too far," an American-accented tourist said, crossing her arms. "Can't she show some respect?" Gray didn't flinch. His fingers remained tightly clasped, and his face held its stern composure. Yet the crowd sensed a storm brewing within him, a struggle between restraint and the urge to respond. The horse in danger. Karen, unsatisfied with the reaction, decided to escalate further. She approached a nearby horse, a majestic black animal with a gleaming mane, trained to remain calm under pressure. "Well, if you won't entertain us, maybe your little horsey will put on a show," she said mockingly, reaching for the reins. The horse shifted uneasily, sensing danger. A few children in the crowd began to cry, and one man shouted, "Hey, stop! That's dangerous!" But Karen just laughed. She looked at the horse like it was a toy, oblivious to the risk she was creating. "Oh, relax! It's just a big pony!" The crowd's reaction. "Does she really think she can get away with anything?" an elderly woman whispered to her husband. "She probably thinks her money gives her the right to do whatever she wants," he replied. Several tourists began filming the scene. Some voiced their disapproval loudly, while others stood silently, feeling a growing unease. Karen, noticing the attention she was drawing, turned back to Gray. "You're here for the tourists. Entertain us. Or are you just a fancy mannequin?" A subtle warning. At one moment, Gray made the slightest movement. His right hand tensed briefly, his fingers curling into a fist for a split second before relaxing again. It was such a subtle gesture that most didn't notice, but those who did understood. The guardsman's patience was wearing thin. Karen didn't recognize the warning. She stepped closer to the horse, this time reaching for its mane. "Well, if you're not going to say anything, maybe I'll tame your little beast," she said with a laugh. The horse jerked its head, sensing the threat, and let out a loud neigh that echoed through the square. The tension rose sharply, and the crowd seemed to collectively hold its breath, waiting for what would happen next. Gray remained still, but his presence radiated authority and unease in equal measure. It was as if he was waiting for the perfect moment to act, adhering to protocol until the very last possible second. The crowd at the royal stables held its breath. Karen was still standing near the horse, her loud laughter echoing across the square. Her eyes sparkled with a sense of complete impunity. But then, something happened that no one expected. The guardsman breaks his silence. Sergeant Richard Gray, always impeccably composed, raised his hand and pointed directly at Karen. His voice, like a clap of thunder, rang out. "Step back, ma'am. You've crossed the line." Those words, spoken with icy calmness, cut through the noise of the crowd. People froze, unable to believe their ears. A guardsman, always a silent symbol of British tradition, had spoken. But Karen only smirked. "Oh, you can talk?" she said, raising an eyebrow. "Great! Then tell me why I can't enjoy the royal show." Her sarcasm was palpable, but this time it failed to amuse the spectators. Even the most indifferent tourists felt that a line had been crossed. Richard Gray did something that made everyone gasp. He stepped away from his post, moving toward Karen. His tall figure in the red uniform, topped by the imposing bearskin hat, loomed over her like a judge delivering a verdict. "Ma'am, your arrogance isn't a show," he said with cold irony. "It's a violation of the law. You're endangering yourself and others. Step back behind the line immediately." Karen faltered. Her confident demeanor wavered for a moment as she took a step back, though she tried to save face. "I just wanted a photo. I mean, you're here for us tourists, right?" Gray's expression didn't soften. His piercing calm gaze left no room for doubt. "We're not here for your entertainment, ma'am. We serve our country, and you are required to respect the rules." The crowd erupted into applause. Several people shouted words of approval. "Well done, Guardsman!" Finally, someone put her in her place. Children who had been crying earlier started to smile, while some parents nodded in agreement. Karen's friends, sensing the awkwardness of the situation, stepped away, leaving her alone in front of the steadfast guardsman. Someone in the crowd called out, "Now that's discipline! A true professional!" Karen, realizing she was losing her audience, turned away and, with a scowl, quickly walked off. Her phone was still in her hand, but this time it wasn't being used to record anything. The aftermath. A video of the incident captured by a bystander began circulating on social media almost immediately. In the comments, people praised the guardsman's actions. "This is how you defend tradition. That guardsman is an example for everyone." Richard Gray, as if nothing had happened, returned to his post. His motionless figure once again blended into the majestic image of the Royal Guard. The entire episode served as a reminder that even the strictest rules can be bent when dignity is at stake. The video recorded by one of the tourists went viral on social media. The captions accompanying the footage were filled with emotion. Some admired the guardsman's bravery, while others expressed outrage at Karen's behavior. The comments formed a chorus of respect. Finally, someone stood up to these kinds of people. This guardsman is the definition of protecting tradition. Karen in the spotlight, realizing the situation had spiraled out of control, Karen tried to blend into the crowd. Her face burned with embarrassment, but she was already under the shadow of the law. 2 police officers approached her, their tone polite but firm as they addressed her violations. "Ma'am, you crossed the safety boundary and endangered others. We're asking you to leave the premises." The crowd murmured in approval, and some even clapped. Karen, lowering her gaze, tried to justify herself. "I didn't think it was that serious. It's just a show, right?" One of the officers shook his head. "It's not a show, ma'am. It's a tradition that deserves respect." Her friends, sensing the growing tension, hurried away, leaving Karen to face the consequences alone. She complied with the officer's request and was escorted off the premises. Meanwhile, Richard Gray stood at his post. He adjusted his bearskin hat slightly and resumed his usual motionless stance. His face once again became the embodiment of calm and discipline. "That's what true resilience looks like," whispered a nearby tourist. "People like him make us proud of this country," added a woman with a noticeable foreign accent. The crowd's reaction. The crowd's reaction was unanimous. Applause, smiles, and words of support. One child who had been crying earlier now tugged at his mother's hand, pointing at the guardsman. "Mom, he's a hero, right?" As the sun began to set, casting a golden light over the square, the crowd slowly dispersed, still discussing the incident. Cameras continued to focus on Gray, standing immovable, a symbol of steadfastness. A young man with an American accent turned to his companions. "That was incredible! Such respect for tradition. We could all learn something from that." The last rays of sunlight illuminated Richard, standing guard over royal honor. His majestic silhouette served as a silent reminder that traditions aren't just customs of the past, but a foundation of respect, honor, and dignity.